Nebraska, 1878, was where Nora Jensen's world crumbled apart for the second time in her life, when she stood at her brother-in-law's doorstep with her 4 children huddled behind her like frightened deer, only to have the door slammed in their faces. "Whores and their bastards ain't welcome here." He'd spat through the crack in the door before the latch clicked shut, leaving them in the cold autumn wind with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a small carpet bag of possessions. Nora's hands trembled as she turned away from the house, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. Her oldest daughter, 12-year-old Sarah, squeezed her hand. "It's all right, Mama," Sarah whispered, though her voice wavered. "We'll find somewhere." Behind Sarah stood 10-year-old James, who held the hand of little Emma, just 6 years old. The baby, 4-year-old Thomas, was balanced on Nora's hip, his face buried in her neck. They'd traveled nearly 100 miles by stage and wagon to reach her late husband's family, her last hope after the consumption took Frank 8 months ago. "We'll find a place," Nora agreed, her voice stronger than she felt. "This isn't the only house in Nebraska." But as they walked down the dirt road leading away from the sprawling farmhouse, Nora knew their options were limited. Frank's death had left them destitute. The drought had ruined their small farm in Kansas, and the bank had swooped in like vultures before Frank's body was even cold. She'd written to Frank's brother, Walter, begging for shelter until she could find work, but his response had become painfully clear. "Where will we go now, Mama?" James asked, his small face pinched with worry far beyond his years. Nora squared her shoulders. "We'll head into town." There must be work somewhere. The town of Clearwater was 3 miles down the road. By the time they reached the dusty main street, Emma was crying from sore feet and Thomas had fallen into an exhausted sleep against Nora's shoulder. Her arms ached, but she refused to put him down. The town consisted of one main street with the usual establishments: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other businesses. Nora's heart sank as she realized how small it was. In a place this size, news traveled fast, and Walter Jensen was obviously a man of standing. If he'd rejected them, others might follow suit. Her first stop was the hotel, a 2-story clapboard building with peeling white paint. The proprietress, a stout woman with hard eyes, looked over the tired family with clear disapproval. "I need a room for the night," Nora said, digging into her reticule for the precious few dollars she had left. "And I'm looking for work if you know of any." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You Jensen's kin?" Nora's heart sank. "I was married to his brother Frank, heard about you." The woman's voice chilled. "No rooms available, please," Nora whispered. "We have nowhere else to go. The children are exhausted." "Should have thought of that before you came here with no husband and 4 mouths to feed." The woman turned away. "Try the next town over." Rejection followed them from door to door. The general store owner wouldn't hire her. The restaurant had no positions. By dusk, they sat on a bench outside the general store, the children quiet with hunger and exhaustion. Nora had spent her last coins on bread and cheese, which they'd shared, but it wasn't enough. "We can sleep in the livery," Sarah suggested quietly. "It'll be warm there." Nora nodded, too tired to cry anymore. "Let's try." The livery stable sat at the edge of town, a large, weathered building with the scent of hay and horses drifting from its open doors. Nora approached cautiously, the children trailing behind her. "Hello," she called, stepping into the dimly lit interior. "Is anyone here?" A tall figure emerged from one of the stalls, pitchfork in hand. He was backlit by a lantern hanging on a post, casting his face in shadow, but Nora could make out broad shoulders and the outline of a cowboy hat. "Stables closed for the night," came a deep voice, slightly rough around the edges. "Unless you've got a horse needs boarding." "No, sir," Nora replied, her voice small. "I was hoping. That is, my children and I need a place to sleep for the night. Just the night. We can sleep in the hay and we'll be gone by morning." The man stepped forward, and the lantern light revealed his face. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with tanned skin that spoke of long days in the sun. His eyes were a startling blue beneath the brim of his hat, and a few days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. He looked from Nora to the children, his expression unreadable. "You're Frank Jensen's widow," he stated rather than asked. Nora's heart sank. "Yes." To her surprise, instead of turning them away, he leaned his pitchfork against the wall and stepped closer. "Name's Yates. Yates Montgomery. I own this place." "Nora Jensen," she replied automatically. "These are my children, Sarah, James, Emma, and Thomas." Yates studied them for a long moment, his gaze lingering on the exhausted children. Thomas had begun to whimper against Nora's neck, overtired and hungry. "You all look dead on your feet," he said finally. "And that little one needs a proper bed." "Please," Nora whispered, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to contain it. "Just for tonight, we won't be any trouble." Yates seemed to make a decision. He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair, and ran a hand through it. "I've got rooms above the stable. Nothing fancy, but there's a bed and it's warm. You can stay there tonight." Relief flooded through Nora so intensely she felt her knees weaken. "Thank you. We can pay," he waved a hand. "We'll talk about that tomorrow. Right now, those young'uns need rest." He led them through the stable to a side door and up a narrow staircase. The rooms above were simple but clean, a main room with a small stove, table, and chairs, a bedroom visible through a doorway, and what appeared to be another small room off to the side. "Bedrooms through there," Yates said, gesturing. "There's a small room where I keep supplies that has a cot in it. Between those and the main room you should all fit." "This is more than generous, Mr. Montgomery," Nora said, overcome with gratitude. "Yates," he corrected. "Just Yates. There's some stew left from my supper." "Not much, but it'll fill empty bellies." The children's eyes lit up at the mention of food. Yates moved to the small stove where a pot sat and ladled the remaining stew into bowls. It wasn't a large portion when divided among them, but it was hot and savory. As they ate, Yates busied himself making up the cot in the small room and finding extra blankets. Nora watched him surreptitiously, wondering at his kindness when everyone else had turned them away. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked as the children finished their meal, too tired to question their good fortune. Yates paused in his work, his back to her. "I knew Frank," he said simply. "He was a good man." "You knew my husband," he nodded, turning to face her. "We rode together years back, before he settled down. He saved my life once during a cattle drive when my horse spooked and threw me in front of a charging steer." He shrugged. "Besides, I'm not in the habit of turning away children who need shelter." After the meal, Nora settled the children for sleep, the girls in the bed, James on the cot, and Thomas curled beside her on a pallet Yates had made up in the main room. The children fell asleep almost instantly, exhaustion claiming them. Nora sat by the small window, watching as Yates moved about the stable below, visible through the open stable doors as he completed his evening chores. His kindness was a stark contrast to the cold reception they'd received from her husband's own brother. "Thank you, Frank," she whispered to the night sky, wondering if somehow her husband had guided them to this place, to this man who'd known him. Morning came with the sounds of the stable below, horses nickering, the clatter of tack, Yates's deep voice speaking to the animals. Nora woke before the children and took a moment to properly look around the rooms that had been their sanctuary. The space was simply furnished but neat. A man's space, with little adornment, but there were unexpected touches: a bookshelf with several well-worn volumes, a guitar leaning in one corner, a colorful quilt on the bed that seemed at odds with the otherwise utilitarian furnishings. She rose quietly, smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could, and pinned up her dark blonde hair. The small mirror above the washstand reflected a face too thin, with shadows beneath her green eyes, but Nora squared her shoulders. Today she would find work, find a way forward. A soft knock at the door preceded Yates's entrance. He carried a basket containing bread, cheese, and some apples. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting it on the table. "Mrs. Wilson from the bakery sends these over every morning." "You've already been too kind," Nora protested weakly, though the sight of food made her stomach growl audibly. The corner of Yates's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Eat. Then we can talk about what comes next." The children woke to the smell of food, and despite Nora's attempts to instill manners, they fell upon the simple breakfast like ravenous wolves. Yates watched with an expression that mixed amusement and concern. When they'd finished, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, leaning against the doorframe. "I could use some help around here. The stable's been getting busier with the new stage line, and I've been meaning to hire someone." Hope flared in Nora's chest. "I can work. I'm stronger than I look." Yates nodded. "I don't doubt it. But the work I had in mind was more." He glanced at the children, managing the books, perhaps helping with customers. "And there's a small cottage out back that's been sitting empty since my last hand left to get married. Needs some fixing up, but it would give you all a place of your own." Nora stared at him, speechless. It was too much, too generous. "Why?" she finally managed. Yates shifted, looking uncomfortable. "Like I said, I knew Frank, and—" he hesitated. "I know what it's like to be without options." Before Nora could respond, the door downstairs banged open and a loud voice called up the stairs. "Montgomery, you up there?" Yates's expression darkened. "Walter Jensen," he muttered. "Stay here." He descended the stairs, closing the door behind him. Nora moved to the window where she could see the stable yard below. Walter stood there, his face red with either exertion or anger, probably both. He jabbed a finger at Yates. "You harboring that woman and her brats?" Walter demanded, loud enough for Nora to hear. "Lower your voice in my stable, Jensen," Yates replied, his tone calm but carrying an underlying steel. "You're spooking the horses. I asked you a question." "And I don't answer to you," Yates said. "But yes, Mrs. Jensen and her children spent the night here. What of it?" Walter's face contorted. "She's nothing but trouble. That woman trapped my brother into marriage with a bastard child, then popped out 3 more before consumption took him. Now she's here looking for handouts." Nora's hands clenched into fists. Sarah was Frank's child, conceived before they married, but his nonetheless. He'd loved her as his own from the moment he laid eyes on her. Below, Yates had stepped closer to Walter, using his height advantage to look down at the shorter man. "Frank Jensen married Nora because he loved her, and he loved those children. He spoke of them often and proudly." "What would you know about it?" Walter scoffed. "I knew your brother better than you think," Yates replied, "and I know he'd be ashamed to see how you've treated his family." Walter's face purpled. "You keep that woman if you want, Montgomery, but don't expect any business from me or mine, and don't come crying when she leaves you high and dry." "I think we're done here," Yates said coldly. "Get off my property." Walter stomped away, and Yates watched him go, his posture rigid with anger. When he returned upstairs, Nora moved away from the window, not wanting him to know she'd been watching. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." Yates waved away her apology. "Walter Jensen's been a thorn in my side since I bought this place 3 years ago. Don't worry about him." "But he said—" "He can say what he likes," Yates interrupted. "My offer stands. Job in the cottage if you want them." Nora looked at her children, who watched the exchange with wide, hopeful eyes. "We'll take it," she said softly. "Thank you." The cottage behind the livery stable was small, just 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen, but to Nora and her children it was a palace after weeks of uncertainty. It needed work. The roof leaked in one corner, the porch sagged, and the stove smoked when lit, but it was theirs, at least temporarily. Yates proved to be a fair employer. He showed Nora his haphazard bookkeeping system and seemed relieved when she quickly organized it. Her days fell into a pattern: mornings spent in the stable office handling customers and accounts, afternoons tending to the cottage and children when they returned from the small school, where Yates had insisted on enrolling them, paying their fees himself despite Nora's protests. The townspeople were slower to warm to them. Walter Jensen's influence ran deep, and many regarded Nora with suspicion or outright hostility. But others, seeing her hard work and quiet dignity, gradually began to nod in greeting or stop for brief conversations. Mrs. Wilson from the bakery became an unexpected ally, often sending home extra bread or treats with Yates. The school teacher, Miss Harper, took a liking to Sarah and James, praising their intelligence and good manners. And Doc Peterson, after treating Emma for a mild fever, refused payment, saying gruffly that Montgomery's account is good enough. As autumn deepened toward winter, Yates spent his evenings helping repair the cottage. He fixed the leaking roof, shored up the sagging porch, and tinkered with the stove until it drew properly. The children, initially shy around him, gradually warmed to his quiet presence. Thomas, in particular, attached himself to Yates with the single-minded determination of a 4-year-old who'd found a hero. He followed the tall cowboy around the stable, asking endless questions and mimicking his movements. Yates, to Nora's surprise, showed infinite patience with the boy, answering his queries and occasionally lifting him to sit on a gentle mare's back while he worked. One evening in late November, as the first snow began to fall, Nora sat mending clothes by the fire while the children played a game on the floor. A knock at the door revealed Yates, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Evening," he said, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Brought something for the little ones." From behind his back, he produced a carved wooden horse for Thomas, a small doll for Emma, a book for James, and a pretty hair ribbon for Sarah. The children's faces lit up with delight. "You shouldn't have," Nora protested, even as warmth spread through her chest at his thoughtfulness. Yates shrugged. "Winter's coming. Thought they could use something to keep them occupied when they're stuck inside." After the children had thanked him profusely and returned to their play, Nora gestured to the second chair by the fire. "Will you stay for coffee?" He hesitated, then nodded. "That'd be nice." They sat in companionable silence, watching the children play. Yates seemed content to simply observe, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're good with them," Nora said softly. "They're good kids," he replied. "You've done well by them." "I try." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Do you have family, Yates?" A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore. Had a sister once, but she passed some years back. Consumption, like your Frank." "I'm sorry." He nodded acknowledgement. "Life out here is hard, makes you appreciate the good moments when they come." As the weeks passed, Yates became a regular visitor at the cottage. He often joined them for supper, bringing game he'd hunted or vegetables from the small garden behind his rooms. He taught James to whittle, showed Sarah how to play simple tunes on his guitar, and told Emma and Thomas stories of his days as a trail rider. Nora found herself looking forward to his visits, to his quiet laugh, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was nothing like Frank, who had been boisterous and quick to laugh, always in motion. Yates was steady, thoughtful, his words carefully chosen. Christmas approached, and with it came a heavy snowstorm that blanketed Clearwater in white. The children were ecstatic, building snowmen and engaging in snowball fights. Nora worried about their worn boots and thin coats, but they seemed impervious to the cold in their excitement. On Christmas Eve, Yates arrived with a small pine tree strapped to his back, much to the children's delight. They spent the evening decorating it with paper chains they'd made and pine cones gathered from the woods. Yates produced a small wooden star he'd carved for the top, and Thomas sat on his shoulders to place it. After the children were asleep, Nora and Yates sat by the fire, cups of coffee laced with a bit of whiskey he'd brought warming their hands. "Thank you," Nora said softly, "for everything. This would have been a bleak Christmas without you." Yates looked into his cup. "When Frank and I rode together, he used to talk about the family he wanted someday. A house full of children, a good woman by his side." He glanced at her. "He got his wish even if it was cut short." "Yes," she agreed, tears pricking her eyes. "He was a good father, a good husband." "He told me once," Yates continued, his voice low, "that he'd fallen in love with you the moment he saw you. Said you were singing in the general store where you worked, something about butterflies, and he knew right then." Nora's breath caught. "I remember that day. I didn't know he was there until he came to the counter with a ribbon he'd bought. He said it matched my eyes." "Sounds like Frank," Yates smiled. "Always had a way with words." "Not like you," Nora said, then blushed at her boldness. "I mean, I know what you mean," he said gently. "Never been much for talking. But when you do speak, it matters," she finished. Their eyes met across the small space between their chairs, and something shifted in the air between them. Yates looked away first, clearing his throat. "I should get back," he said, rising. "The horses need checking with this cold." Nora walked him to the door. "Will you join us tomorrow? For Christmas dinner," he nodded. "I'd like that." Christmas Day brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that made the snow glitter like diamonds. The children woke early, excited to find small gifts. Nora had secretly prepared new mittens she'd knitted, candy sticks, and for each child a small toy she'd purchased with her carefully saved wages. Yates arrived mid-morning carrying a large basket. "Mrs. Wilson sent these," he explained, revealing fresh bread, a small cake, and cookies shaped like stars. "And this is from me." He handed Nora a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a beautiful woolen shawl in deep green. "Yates," she breathed. "It's lovely." "Matches your eyes," he said simply, then looked embarrassed. "Least, that's what Mrs. Wilson said when she helped me pick it." The day passed in a blur of happiness, a simple but filling meal, games with the children, singing carols as Yates played his guitar. As evening fell, the younger children grew tired, and Nora put them to bed while Sarah and James read their new books by the fire. Yates helped her wash the dishes, their hands occasionally brushing in the warm water, sending unexpected tingles up Nora's arm. "Been meaning to ask you something," he said as they worked. "Yes. Town's having a New Year's dance at the church. Thought maybe you and the children might like to go." Nora hesitated. "I'm not sure we'd be welcome." "You would if you came with me," Yates said quietly. "As my guests." She looked up at him, studying his face. There was uncertainty there, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I'd like that," she said finally. "We all would." The New Year's dance was a turning point. Yates arrived at the cottage dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that looked as though it had rarely been worn, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. The children were scrubbed and polished, and Nora wore her one good dress with the new shawl draped over her shoulders. They entered the church hall together, Yates's hand lightly touching the small of her back, the children walking ahead. Conversations paused briefly as heads turned their way, but Yates nodded confidently to acquaintances, and gradually the murmuring resumed. Mrs. Wilson bustled over to greet them, followed by Miss Harper and Doc Peterson. Others gradually approached, curiosity overcoming prejudice. Walter Jensen and his wife sat stonily in a corner, deliberately ignoring them, but Nora found she didn't care. The music started and Yates turned to her. "Would you dance with me, Nora?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sounded right on his lips. She nodded, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. His hand was warm at her waist, steady as they moved to the fiddle's tune. "Everyone's watching," she murmured, feeling self-conscious. "Let them," he replied. "They're just seeing what I've seen all along." "What's that?" His blue eyes held hers. "A woman of uncommon courage and grace." The dance ended too soon, but throughout the evening, Yates stayed close to her side. He danced with Sarah too, the girl's face glowing with pride as the tall cowboy guided her carefully through the steps. He even lifted Emma for a turn around the floor, her giggles drawing smiles from the onlookers. By the night's end, something had shifted in the town's perception. Nora felt it in the nods of greeting, the invitations for the children to join games, the quiet conversations with women who had previously avoided her. As they walked home through the crisp night air, the children running ahead, Yates took her hand in his. "All right?" he asked simply. "Better than all right," she replied, squeezing his fingers. Winter gradually gave way to spring. The cottage bloomed under Nora's care curtains at the windows, a small vegetable garden taking shape behind it, the children's laughter filling its rooms. She continued working at the stable, but Yates had insisted on paying her more as business improved, allowing her to put a little aside each month. Their relationship evolved slowly, cautiously. Yates joined them for supper most evenings, helped with chores, taught the boys to fish in the creek that ran behind the property. He and Nora spent quiet evenings on the porch after the children were asleep, talking of small things and large ones, his years as a trail rider, her childhood in Ohio, their hopes and disappointments. He told her of his sister's death and how it had driven him to seek a more settled life. She shared stories of Frank, finding that the memories brought more comfort than pain now. And gradually, without either of them quite noticing when it happened, they began to speak of a shared future in careful, tentative terms. One warm evening in late April, as they sat on the porch swing, Yates took her hand. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "about how I knew Frank." Nora turned to look at him, concerned by his serious tone. "What is it?" Yates took a deep breath. "When I said we rode together, that was true, but it wasn't just on cattle drives." He paused. "We were in the war together, the Union cavalry." "Frank never spoke much of the war," Nora said softly. "Most men don't," Yates replied, "but there's more. After the war, before Frank met you, he hesitated. We rode as bounty hunters for a while, tracking fugitives." Nora nodded slowly. "I knew there were years he'd been away before he settled in Kansas. We weren't always on the right side of the law," Yates continued. "Nothing terrible, but there are men who might still remember us, men who might hold grudges." "Is that why you came to Clearwater, to hide?" He nodded. "Thought a small town would be quiet, safe, and it has been, but I need you to know the truth about me, about my past before." "Before what?" she prompted when he fell silent. Yates's blue eyes met hers, serious and intent. "Before I ask you to be my wife." Nora's breath caught. "Yates." "I love you, Nora," he said simply. "You and those children have become everything to me." I know it hasn't been long since Frank, and if you need more time, I understand. But I wanted you to know where I stand and who I am, the good and the bad." Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "I love you too," she whispered. "The children love you, and the past is the past. We all have things we'd rather leave behind." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." "This is the right moment," Nora said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Yates slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. "Will you marry me, Nora Jensen? You and your children, will you make a family with me?" "Yes," she breathed. "Oh, yes." Their kiss was gentle, tender, a promise of the future they would build together. The wedding took place in June, when the prairie was ablaze with wildflowers. They married in the small church with the children beside them, Sarah as maid of honor, James as best man, Emma throwing flower petals with enthusiastic abandon, and Thomas solemnly carrying the rings on a small cushion. The entire town turned out for the celebration, with the notable exception of Walter Jensen and his wife. Even that absence couldn't dim the joy of the day. Mrs. Wilson baked a magnificent cake. Doc Peterson gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes, and Miss Harper organized the children into a choir that sang surprisingly well. Nora wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair. Yates, in his suit and polished boots, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. The children, dressed in their finest, beamed with pride and happiness. After the ceremony, as friends and neighbors crowded around to offer congratulations, Yates pulled Nora aside for a moment of privacy. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a folded document and handed it to her. "A wedding gift." Nora opened it, her eyes widening as she read. "Yates, this is a deed to the stable and the cottage," he nodded. "And the acre behind it, it's in both our names now. No matter what happens, you and the children will always have a home." Tears filled her eyes. "You are the most remarkable man." "Just a man who found a second chance at happiness," he replied, drawing her close. "With a remarkable woman." That night, after the celebration had ended and the children were asleep in the cottage's second room, now expanded thanks to Yates's carpentry skills, husband and wife lay together in the quiet darkness. "I never thought I'd find this again," Nora whispered against his chest. "After Frank died, I thought that part of my life was over." Yates's hand stroked her hair gently. "I never thought I'd find it at all. Always figured I'd die a lonely old cowboy with nothing but horses for company." "Instead you got a ready-made family," she said with a soft laugh. "4 children overnight. Best thing that ever happened to me," he replied seriously. "You and those children saved me, Nora, gave me something to live for beyond just getting through each day." She raised her head to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "And you saved us." "In every way a person can be saved." In the years that followed, the Montgomery family thrived. Yates expanded the stable business, adding a wagon repair shop and eventually a small horse breeding operation that became known throughout the territory for quality stock. Nora managed the books and gradually took on more responsibility as the business grew, proving to have a shrewd mind for commerce. Sarah, at 16, began teaching at the small school alongside Miss Harper, showing a natural gift for education. James, now 14, worked alongside Yates, developing the same quiet competence and integrity. Emma blossomed into a lively, artistic 10-year-old who filled sketchbooks with surprisingly good drawings. And Thomas, at 8, was his father's shadow, soaking up knowledge of horses and men with equal enthusiasm. 2 years after their wedding, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Hope. She had Yates's blue eyes and Nora's blonde curls, and was adored by her older siblings who vied for the privilege of holding her and teaching her new skills. Walter Jensen and his wife left Clearwater the year after Nora and Yates married. Moving to California after financial difficulties forced the sale of their farm. The irony wasn't lost on Nora, but she felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a quiet sadness that Frank's brother had never known the joy of the family he'd rejected. On a warm summer evening in 1885, 7 years after that fateful day, when Nora and her children had arrived in Clearwater with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hopes, the Montgomery family gathered on the wide porch of their home, no longer a small cottage, but a proper house that Yates had built with his own hands, expanding it room by room as their family and prosperity grew. Sarah sat on the steps, reading to Emma and 3-year-old Hope. James and Thomas were engaged in a game of checkers at a small table. Yates sat in a rocking chair with Nora on his lap, his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched their family. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked softly, turning her head to look at her husband. At 37, there was silver threading through his brown hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he was still the most handsome man she'd ever known. "Not even in my wildest dreams," he replied, tightening his arms around her. "But I wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that brought us here." Nora leaned back against his chest, contentment washing over her like a warm tide. From desperate beginnings, they had built something beautiful, a family bound not just by blood but by choice, by love that had grown strong through trials and joys shared. As the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nora silently thanked the twists of fate that had led her to this town, to this man, to this life that had seemed impossible in those dark days after Frank's death. Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "What are you thinking about, love? About doors," she said. "About how sometimes when one closes, another opens in the most unexpected place." He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. "Like a livery stable door, exactly like that," she agreed with a smile. "And about the kind of man who opens that door wide, not just to a desperate woman, but to her 4 children as well." "Best decision I ever made," Yates said simply. "The moment I saw you standing there with those little ones behind you, something just clicked into place. Like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." Sarah looked up from her book. "Are you two being romantic again?" she asked, her tone mock disapproving but her eyes twinkling. "Your father can't help himself," Nora replied lightly. "He's a hopeless romantic under all that cowboy stoicism." "Am not," Yates protested, but his arms tightened around her. "Are too," chorused the children, even little Hope, though she clearly had no idea what she was agreeing with. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. This was home, not just the house with its solid walls and sturdy roof, but the people within it, the love that had built it board by board, day by day, choice by choice. As darkness fell and stars began to prick the vast Nebraska sky, Nora knew with bone-deep certainty that they had created something rare and precious. A family forged in hardship but sustained by love. A home where every child was cherished, where the past's wounds had healed into scars that only made them stronger. And it had all begun with a cowboy who opened his door when everyone else had closed theirs, not out of pity, but out of recognition of kindred spirits, of possibilities that could bloom even in the harsh realities of frontier life. "I love you," Yates whispered against her hair, words he said often but never without meaning. "And I love you," Nora replied, turning in his arms to kiss him softly. "Today, tomorrow, always." Around them, their children groaned good-naturedly at the display of affection, but their eyes shone with the security of knowing they were part of something unshakable, something that would endure through whatever challenges life might bring. The door that had opened that autumn day had led not just to shelter for a night, but to a lifetime of belonging. In the end, Nora reflected, that was the greatest gift anyone could receive, not just a house, but a home, not just survival, but a chance to truly live, not just acceptance, but love that asked for nothing in return. As night deepened and they gathered the children to go inside, Yates took Nora's hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Their eyes met in perfect understanding, in the quiet acknowledgement of all they had built together and all that still lay ahead. Sometimes, Nora thought as she followed her family into the warmth of their home, the greatest acts of courage weren't dramatic rescues or daring feats, but simply opening a door when it would have been easier to keep it closed. And sometimes, the most profound love stories weren't written in grand gestures, but in the daily choice to care for another's children as your own, to see beauty in a desperate woman's determination, to believe in second chances when the world said they weren't deserved. That night, as she had every night since becoming Yates Montgomery's wife, Nora fell asleep listening to the steady rhythm of her husband's heartbeat, surrounded by the peaceful breathing of their children, secure in the knowledge that they had found their way home, not to a place, but to each other. And that, she knew with absolute certainty, was a love story worth every hardship that had led to its beginning.